It's not a panel event. We do have some invited special guests with us this evening, but it's not us talking at you for an hour. It's a system of organised listening. It's loosely based on a news organisation conference where you take an interesting subject of the moment and debate it to try and get an idea of what you think about it or what you might do about it journalistically. And for that reason, they work best when you hear from as many people in the room as possible. We do have one rule for those of you who have been here before. What is the rule? No questions, exactly. That's because we think people tend to hide behind a question when actually they've got an opinion about something and they have something to say. There are 3 things I do need to tell you before we get started. If you could just turn your phones on silent, that would be great. You're being filmed for the benefit of the members who might not be here and want to watch it through our app. And the little tortoise making her way across the screen is called Agatha. She's a timer. She moves slowly but steadily for an hour, and when she hits the end, a little flag goes up, and that means we have to stop. So please keep an eye on her. Stick your hand in the air. Say your name if you've got something to say when I come to you, but don't leave it right until the last few minutes. Now I shall introduce our fantastic guest. We've got Kate Moyle, who is a sex and relationships psychotherapist. We've got Simon May, who is a professor of philosophy at King's College London, specialising in the ethics and philosophy of love and has written a book on the history of love. And we've got Sophie Ward, who is the author of A Marriage Proposal, Love and Other Thought Experiments. She's an actor who was married to a man, but came out about 25 years ago and has been with the same woman ever since, Renee, who's sitting in the front row. Kate, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. One of the things I'm interested in this, and this is a series, this is the second ThinkIn and a series of 3 ThinkIns. The first one was how we find love. This is how we keep love. And the next one is how we get over love. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is how those things have changed over time. I spoke to you on the phone before this, and you gave me a great Esther Perel quote, that monogamy used to be one person for a lifetime, and now it's one person at a time. Why is that? Why do you think that attitude has changed?
I think from the conversation we had, that the way that people have relationships now has completely changed. It's something I definitely see as a relationship couples therapist as well. We see that traditionally not always both partners were working, so that changes the dynamic of things completely. That religion plays a much less dominant role in kind of the majority of people's lives, but also that dating, the way we date, the way we meet, the way we stay together has completely changed. So the dynamics of the dating world, the relationship world are completely transformed, and technology has obviously had a huge impact on that. The iPhone is 11 years old, and we see that that has actually completely transformed how people are together, how they spend their time together. We see this idea of the sex recession at the moment, particularly in younger couples. And so we're understanding that technology is playing a very big interruption, but it also allows us couples to stay together when they're not even in the same countries.
I have read about the sex recession, but for those who haven't, would you just sort of articulate? I mean, it's pretty transparent. It's a reduced amount of sex in the younger generation.
In particularly the younger generation, so in particularly the under 30s, and it was all kind of everyone was beginning to talk about it, but it all came off the back of a big Atlantic article, which I think came out at the beginning of last year, where they actually labelled it a sex recession.
And just that point about digital dating is interesting, because what you seem to be implying is that the way we meet is different, but that then goes on to have an impact on the kind of relationships we're having in the long term. It doesn't just stop at where we meet, it carries on.
And I think the difficulty that lots of people currently find is that it is a constant kind of through the looking glass view into other people's relationships. So we see the impact of social media. We're constantly comparing ourselves against other people. Everyone else's looks better, more fun, idealistic, perfect. And we never see the other bit. So we're constantly then thinking, okay, well, why is mine not like this? So we have this constant comparison going on. So we see the impact on self-esteem in relationships as well, but also the constant accessibility and availability of other potential partners, and that is an issue for some people.
Do you think if I started up a social media app just for people, just to show couples arguments, it would be a great success? Make us all feel loads better.
I really do.
Business idea. Simon, I asked you the same question when we spoke, and I was sort of the opinion that that our longevity, which is one of the sort of key tortoise themes, the fact that we're living so much longer, was a really big impact on relationships today. That, you know, once when we got married, we were, or in a long-term relationship, we didn't expect it to last, you know, maximum sort of 25 years, and that might be 50 years or, you know, even more. And you sort of poo-pooed that idea and were like, I don't think that's the biggest thing, actually. Would you tell me why?
Well, I didn't poo-poo it, but I mean...
Can't believe I just said that. I don't know why that came out of my mouth.
Yes, I don't know where that came from. But basically, what I said to you was that, you know, if people maintain an intimate relationship today for even 8 years, I'm not sure what the average is, but it's not a lot more than that, that's already terrific. Now, longevity, the fact that people are now living to, you know, 90 or whatever the average is rather than 60, means that longevity is actually not the factor, because relationships are so short anyway. So I think the difficulty in maintaining, or the challenge of maintaining relationships, is to do with two long-term trends. You know, as a philosopher, you know, I might as well talk to those sorts of things. And one is the growth of autonomy, the cult of autonomy. It actually started in the 18th century with people like Kant, but only then in terms of legislating one's own values. But now autonomy, self-government is everything, and it's become more and more and more. So, I mean, obviously, autonomy is in some ways in conflict with intimate relationships, because you always want to remain in control. You always want, I mean, when you're being autonomous. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that we've reached this sort of age in civilization where almost everything that used to be thought of as given, I mean, you know, whether it's the existence of God or whether it's gender, whatever it is now an autonomous decision. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but what I'm saying, I mean, it would be stupid to say there was, because it's such a long-term trend. It's right now absolutely irreversible. It's only going in one direction, but it's clearly inimical to stable relationships, or makes them more challenging. And I think the second thing that's really developed massively is the sort of consumerist attitude to relationships. And again, I'm not saying this in a negative way necessarily, but it's very challenging. So the idea is that, you know, consumerism is about short-term pleasure giving, failing which we move on to the next item. Now that's okay when it's an object. When it's a person, you know, you hear people talking the whole time about moving on. And they're moving on because they're not getting the pleasure they expected. But crucially, they're not treating people just like commodities, because they still have an ideal of the ideal relationship. They're still in pursuit, at least that's what they take themselves to be doing, of something, you know, of the great love, of the one person who's going to fulfill them in so many ways and help them to feel authentic, and with whom they can feel totally at home in the world and totally intimate, and all the things that, you know, we do need. But that kind of attitude of consumerism does lead, of course, to a kind of impatience. And so, you know, if you don't get what you want within a relatively short period of time, people often move on. And I think that the spread of say, of internet dating and what's available is really it's just exacerbated the trend. I don't think it's created it.
Okay.
So those would be the sort of two reasons why I think longevity is not the real challenge.
I mean, you mentioned that consumerist attitude to relationship comes about because we're not getting the pleasure that we're expecting, and that sort of, to me, ties in with that idea of, you know, perfection. There's just a couple of slides on this. Hopefully someone is on slides. This is all in this little handy booklet that you should have been given, but there are some quite neat quotes in there. I think, oh yes, they have come to the screen. It's become more difficult for our marriage to live up to expectations, which means more of us are ended up disappointed. So that's exactly what you're saying. And the next one is really about soulmates. And I just thought that this was an interesting quote. The search for a soulmate is fruitless and destructive. A soulmate is not a thing. at least it's not a thing you can find. It's a myth trafficked to us by folks who need to peddle movie tickets and iTunes downloads. Now, that's one of you. Who here believes in the idea of soulmates or the one? Oh, we have got a couple of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm going to come back to some of you in a second. I'm just going to ask you that question, and then I'd love to hear from you guys. Because I did ask you this, and I thought it might be awkward because your wife is sitting right there. Yeah, no. But you were very happy to say.
Yeah, well, I don't think I believe in the one, but that doesn't mean I don't think that you can find a soulmate. But and a little bit in the quote there, it's not something that maybe necessarily is there when you first meet somebody, but between, let's say, two people, you can fashion something together that works for both of you if you find that you've got the right chemistry there, the right ingredients. I mean, when I met Renee, we were sort of forced into a situation together. Renee was living in America, I was in England, and Renee had to come over to England so that we could be together. I had children, and then we didn't know each other very well. We'd known each other for about 6 months before you gave everything up and moved to England. And then everybody, it was in the newspapers, so everybody else knew about it. And then we were sort of thrust into this situation where we were forging a relationship in the public eye, really. And we weren't sure that it was going to work out. We just hoped. And sort of took that leap, and we were really lucky, I think lucky, because how could we have known? But over 25 years, we still, well, I feel very strongly still in love and very happy and very satisfied. I'm not a very good shopper, I'm not a very good consumer, so I'm very, very happy to be in my relationship, and you can speak for yourself, darling.
But, I mean, it's quite interesting because what you seemed to say there was that the soulmatishness has come about with time, with sort of forging together. But for you to have given up your life after just 6 months and not knowing each other very well, it must have felt like there was something there from the start.
Yes, so for me, there was something. I'm not saying that there is the one or not the one. What I felt was that something I never had felt before, and going back to the iTunes movie issue, was I was a lesbian and I was not going to settle down, and I was in my truck and I had my, and there was only one seat there, and I was going to date as many women as I could, and all of a sudden I met this woman who literally, like a Hollywood movie, swept me off my feet. And when I left the ground, I thought, do I ever want to not feel this again? And how do I work this out with all of the other obstacles in my way, becoming British. And
Very good. Very authentic right there. What about those other people who sort of put their hands up to the soulmatishness? There were some hands over here. It was you. Would you say your name?
Agla.
Sorry?
Agla.
Agla. Would you tell us why you think that?
I think this is my partner. But
I was just going to ask. He suddenly looked very awkward.
So I think soulmate, firstly, doesn't mean one soulmate for the whole of my life. I personally am really inspired by the book that I read a couple of years, which is called 40 Rules of Love. It's about the poet Rumi and his beloved, and what it meant for me, and what in general I think about the partnership or the partners. My other half, the partner, is a reflection of me, who I am now. And that person is like a mirror of me and shows me where I'm not seeing myself exactly. And my relationship with that person is as good and as pure as what I am and who I am now. So like when I was in my 20s, obviously it was not as deep, not as, like, say, aware of myself, exploring. Therefore, my relationships were like this. Sorry. And then, And now when I'm much older, I know myself more. I've been through a couple of relationships. I know where my ground is, what I'm worth, and therefore I feel my relationship and my partnership is very different.
Okay, so it's yes to the idea of soulmates, but not necessarily soulmates for life. Soulmates for a moment.
Not necessarily. Probably that's kind of we could say it this way, but I think it's still a soulmate for a moment, for like a time frame of life.
Okay. Okay. And anyone else who there's a hand at the back.
I'm just going to challenge you.
Would you say your name?
Rose.
Hi, Rose. Hello again.
I challenge the view. I think so that it has to be that soulmates are necessarily romantic, because I'm a single woman, but I met my best friend when I think I've had several what I would call soulmates in my life that have come in and out. My best friend is the closest person I have in my life, and we've been best friends since our mums met in the NCT, so before we were even born. And like I genuinely couldn't live without her, and I don't think she could with me. I would hope not. But there's absolutely nothing sexual about that love at all. But it's so pure and so lovely, and it's responded to so many different difficulties in my life. I think so for me, yes to soulmates. If you can marry that with romantic love, cool. If not, still.
So I definitely want to have a conversation about friendship in this discussion, and I think that's a really interesting part of it. One of the things I was reading about was how strong friendship bonds are in your sort of teens and 20s. How old are you?
That's a good question. 32.
32, and how they become a challenge in a different way to keep when you're older, just because of life changes.
So that's interesting as well, because just to my best friend and I have had completely different trajectories in terms of. So I'm 32, single, doing the career thing, I suppose so. And she met her partner when we were 16 at school, and they've been together since. She's got 2 kids. She lives in Bath. And we still text each other. We say goodnight every night still.
Aww.
Since I literally, when I say this out loud, like it gets a really mixed response. Like, some people are like, "That's pretty weird," and then other people want to assume that there's something like sexual about it. People think that there's not. It's literally the purest and nicest. It's so funny because I talk to my therapist about it, and I'm like, I think maybe I'm just bad at relationships, and she's like, "You've got this amazing relationship that I've never seen." And like in the past year, I lost my job. She had her second baby. I shouldn't really announce this. She had some mental health problems after she had her second baby. I lost my job. I went down to Bath. We muddled together, sorted out me having to find a job, her and this is 32 years after we met, and we still are in completely different parts of our lives, and we're making it work. But for me, yeah. So that's soulmate territory.
So within, I'm coming to you just for a second. Within friendships, keeping it going. Even I'm quite dismissive of Facebook friends or whatever.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the things I read when I was thinking about this is just the act of keeping a friendship going at the basic level, which might just be saying happy birthday on Facebook, counts for something. It's not everything, but it helps. And there's a hand here, and then I think that there was a hand. What's your name?
My name's Paula.
Paula. Hello, Paula.
So I think soulmates, I tend to agree with you that I don't think there's a one and only soulmate, but I think soulmates exist. I'm a widow. My husband was my soulmate. And what I used to say is that when you meet somebody who's a soulmate, it's just easy. You just kind of fit together in a way that relationships can be complicated and there's problems with them, but we just fitted together.
But was it always easy, or did you have to work at it?
Well, I think anybody who expects that you don't have to work at relationships are not going to have good relationships, because you always have to work at relationships. My husband was ill for many years. Lots of people thought we had a very difficult relationship, but we were always soulmates.
Okay, thank you, Paula. And there was another couple of hands. And if they've gone down, where's Parika? Harika, so this is my colleague Harika, and pulled from the back into the centre of the conversation because I had a really interesting conversation with Harika about her grandparents who were...
Yeah, so it's really interesting for me because my grandparents are definitely the happiest couple that I know in terms of my family, and they had an arranged marriage, which really common for people of my grandparents' age, of an Asian background. And I think it's what they've probably said to me a lot of times is that nowadays people are maybe more fickle, and I don't know whether that's the right word to use necessarily, but in that they've worked very hard at their marriage, and I think there's never the idea of, oh, the grass is green on the other side and all these things. And I think whilst they've gone through a lot of challenges, divorce and things like that isn't what they think of straight away, and I think it would take a lot for them to actually split up. So, I mean, it's not worked in a lot of cases, and I'm not signing myself up for one, but
you see a relationship which has that consumerist mentality that Simon was talking about completely taken out of it.
Yeah,
which and there is a benefit to that.
And now you have stuff like this Love is Blind thing on TV. What is that about? Like, it's just so opposite. So it's really interesting.
I have not watched Love is Blind because everyone talks about how I just think I'm just going to go into it and I'm never going to come out and I can't risk it. It's too much of a time suck.
How much of it do you think is about the expectations that people then go into relationships with? So the expectation of an arranged marriage being that you have to work at it from the start because you don't know each other at all. So you're going in blind, if we're going to use the Love is Blind hashtag. But I think that the idea being that you build from the ground up, there is nothing to start it apart from the fact that you can put together, whereas that I think that expectations and unrealistic expectations are one of the most damaging things that I definitely work with in relationships and with couples.
Expectations, unrealistic expectations.
I think that they are emphasised by the culture and the world we currently live in, but that the psychology of where you start is, and ties into Soulmates, that idea as well.
Okay.
Say as well, like...
Would you say your name? Sorry.
Freya.
Hi, Freya.
So like the unrealistic expectation, to pick up on that, the idea that the whole thing about your marriage being about your wedding is something so ingrained, even in my generation, where like it's still on the top of loads of people's agenda, even though 1 in 3 marriages ends in divorce. It's like they want the £25,000 wedding, and it's so much about the focus of the day rather than the life. And people just don't think about it. It's like, that's my goal, that's my goal, that's my goal. I must find the man, must get married. And I know that's coming from the women's perspective, but it's just rife, and I'm still so shocked that is then a surprise when they're like, oh, it didn't really work out.
So we have got some slides about how expectations of marriage are changing. Oh, no, not them. On you go. Percentage that agree with the statement marriage is outdated. Even 12% of people who are married, but maybe they're not happy. But as you can see, that there are quite a number of people. Though I would say that I have done a ThinkIn which touched on this subject before, and I asked the question to the room: who here thinks marriage is outdated? And nearly every hand went up. And then I asked the question: who wants to get married? And nearly every hand went up. So that touches on what you were just saying. And there's another one which should show... Is there another one? Maybe. No, not that one. So that one. So the average age of first marriage, you can see how it is, people are getting older all the time. So fewer people are getting married than ever before, partly because there are other things on offer, civil partnerships, but also when they are, the age is hugely increasing, which probably isn't a surprise with our longer lives. Were there some more hands anywhere that I missed? Oh, here, there's a hand there and then there's a hand there.
Well, considering...
Would you say your name?
Sorry, yes. My name's Karina. And I thought about this the other day, actually. It's quite a new thought. And I was wondering whether it's not that marriages are worse nowadays. It's that people have the freedom to divorce, especially women. There's no social consequences, there's no financial consequences, and there's less of kind of, there's basically statistically more of a freedom to be able to divorce in an unhappy marriage. And perhaps statistically, maybe people were forced to stay in an unhappy marriage before, whilst now you can kind of explore this idea of having multiple soulmates and multiple marriages during a lifetime, and that be okay. So I think maybe it's not necessarily that marriages are worse, but now that divorce is more available to us, and that's actually okay and possibly a good thing.
So when we talk about how do we keep love, we shouldn't necessarily, in your view, be looking to keep love for all eternity. It's fine to keep it as long as it's working, and we should embrace divorce.
Yeah.
Or,
well,
you know, splitting. It doesn't have to be about marriage, but... You know.
Yes. Well, I suppose I'm making the point that we're comparing kind of marriage in, you know, the past and marriage now,
Yeah.
in a kind of more modern contemporary society, and perhaps the love is still there, and statistically the same amount of couples are unhappy, perhaps, and the same amount of couples are happy. It's just maybe statistically marriage is now divorce is now an available option whilst it wasn't before, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that because marriage now ends in divorce more often, it doesn't mean that marriage is less unhappy or happy. I think it's two sort of separate things.
Thanks, Karina. And there's a hand there and then a hand there.
Sharon, my name's Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
I suppose it's an observation and something that really interested me, because I've got neighbours and long-term friends of 20 years. They are now in their 80s, but have been together, not married for about 35 years, so that we all kind of accepted them as being married. They got married 2 years ago for pragmatic reasons, because one of them had been ill, and they realised the difference when they were in hospital in terms of the decisions one could take over the other and the consultation that the medical staff would have with them. But when they did get married, I spoke to my friend, the female friend, and said, does it feel different? I almost asked the question as a little bit of a joke. Does it feel different? And she thought about it. She really thought about it. And she said, yes, it does.
Because I think most
and
people would...
that was quite profound to me, because I said to her, you know, I was taking her out to something on her own, and I said, does it feel different? And it was a light-hearted question, and she really thought and said, yes, it does.
But why? Did you ask her why?
I think it just, you know, they would never have split, but I think it's just that final step into commitment.
All right, thank you. And the hand at the back.
I'd like to speak to both of those previous points actually. One is that I think at the moment marriage in terms of in legal terms, so like end of life care or if you have children, is still the best option in terms of you know, making things easy for yourself, having the same names for kids, for airports and all that kind of stuff. I think until those laws are changed, marriage is still a really good option. And I would also like to say that while we still have a gender pay gap, it's not that easy for a lot of women to get out of marriages, and divorce is expensive and an option to people who have the funds to do it.
Okay, thank you. And so I was going to mention a little thing, because I'm quite keen to get to this idea of how do we keep love, which is, you know, I'm not promising to come away with the answers tonight. I wish I could. But I was quite interested to read about some research by a man called John Gottman. He spent 40 years studying relationships, and a small amount. He says that with just a small amount of time with couples, he can predict the likelihood of divorce by 83%. And can predict the likelihood of relationship breakdown. And he has sort of 4 horsemen, he would call it, the four kinds of negativity that would definitely mean the end of a relationship. So for those of you who are interested in how to keep love, you have to avoid stonewalling, which is withdrawing and shutting down, just saying I'm not going to talk about it, a defensiveness, criticism, and the worst one is contempt. So anything that sort of borders on contempt would be the absolute.
Pretty far down the line. Sort of there.
If you're there with contempt, it's all gone. Especially if you're only in 15 minutes. If you can't hold it together in 15 minutes with a stranger, you're contemptuous in that time. I think things are pretty bad. But actually, I think the stonewalling and the defensiveness are actually quite interesting, because I think people do shut down, and I was even been guilty of doing that myself. There's a hand over there.
My name's Diana. So, because you mentioned John Gottman, I have to tell you my story about him. Before he changed his name to Gottman, he was dating my mother years and years ago.
This is such a great contribution.
I don't know if it was his first effort of experimentation, but he really seriously experimented with relationships. He decided he wanted to see just how much my mother was into him or not. So he asked somebody else to ask her out on a date. And that is my father, who asked her out on a date. So
maybe not such a relationships expert after all.
Yes, that was part of his foundation. But there's something else on my mind tonight, because so I've been very traditionally married to the same person for 30 years. I got married quite young, and it's been a completely monogamous and happy marriage. But recently I told one of my kids, who's in her 20s, that, before I got married, I sometimes dated more than one person at the same time, and I thought that was okay. And that, was a huge moral shock for her. She was just like, oh my God, I thought you were a faithful, monogamous person. I don't know. And for me, that was strange, because to me, I've been married most of my life, and to me that's a committed thing. But when I was dating, to date several people at once didn't seem weird to me. But I'm just kind of wondering how that feels to other people.
So someone else said to me, you must ask everyone how they feel about whether that is essential, or whether there is that French sort of, we can be a bit more open about it, can be acceptable in a relationship. What does everyone feel about that? There's a hand over there. Hi, Francesca.
I just think once you get into a committed relationship, you give away so much that to be, to be just that person from day one, it seems not to make much sense. And also, by the way, that you don't want to kind of come on too strong. It's almost, I suppose, it's pragmatic. Maybe it's a defense mechanism, but I don't think that it's necessarily immoral. I don't see why we should sort of enter into a sort of marriage-like situation from day one. I think that kind of thing should be earned. It should be a sort of slow burn.
So you're quite open to it, but perhaps presumably communication and making sure you're on the same page is quite...
That's the awkward part, right?
Interesting, you give away so much once you get into a relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's quite an interesting observation. I don't see it like that.
You don't see it that way. But that's a... Hello.
Tom, I just think logistically, how do you do it?
Who's got the energy?
Shared Google calendars and how's that possible?
People do use shared Google calendars.
No, but presumably you're saying, it's Francesca, yes? Presumably you're saying in an open way. So it wouldn't matter if you have a shared Google calendar, you're saying...
No, I mean, okay, so shared Google calendars, that sounds very polyamory, right? Which I think, is a logistical nightmare, like who has the time. But, if you're seeing someone, and, my brother, for instance, he's just, in his first ever relationship, he's 27, and they're going to get married, so I bet my cousin a tenner, so it's happening. But, so, it was a slow burn. They both very busy professionals. Over a 3-month period, they went on, like a handful of dates, and maybe they were dating other people, I don't know, whatever. But I just think, if things aren't very intense very early on, then the time is there, and you don't necessarily have to say, oh, I'm dating someone else, because there's no commitment there yet. So I just think, maybe we should be slower to commit, because once you commit, then if you're down for the whole monogamy thing, then it's a pretty long song.
So it's a bit more like the American sort of dating a lot of people before you go steady.
Why not?
Why not? Why not? Anyone else on that sounds good? There's a couple of hands here. This lady on this lady. You go first.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting talking about the whole keeping love thing. That's been on my mind quite a lot recently. Talking to a lot of friends as well. Because I just wonder about how much attachment, I don't know how much anyone here knows about attachment theory, I've just been quite deep in it recently, and about the ways in which we love and how different they can be for different people depending on their life circumstances and the way that they were brought up and the way in which they received love as a young person. And I do think that so much of the problems in relationships can come when we, so like to throw some stats out there, love a stat, and I've just been frantically scrabbling to find out actually where I got the stat from, so I'll have to follow up, but there's a lot of research that's been done that says about 50% of people, of the population, and this is the US and across Europe, are some Western society based, but are securely attached, and that's the idea that we have this balance, you know, we were brought up in a way that we have this balance between independence, so kind of what you were talking about before, yeah, sorry.
Simon,
yeah, that idea that we have this real sense of independence, but also codependency with other people, and I think, where am I going with it? I think it's quite interesting because that's only 50% of people, and they say after the age of 30, a lot of people who are in the dating pool may have different forms of insecure attachment, which is anxious attachment on one side and avoidant. And I speak to personal experience here because I've been going through this with my partner, who was brought up in a very traditional pulley bootstraps up way, not a lot of love shown in his home when he was growing up. And he's carried that throughout every single adult relationship he's gone in, that idea of he needs to be an island, he doesn't want to give too much away, he doesn't really, I don't know, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that or anyone's thoughts on it, because I think I speak to a lot of my guy friends who are in the dating pool now, and they are a lot of them are avoidant. They just they don't want to give too much away, and when they're in relationships, they shut down when it gets intense.
And without being too sort of Freudian about it, you think that a lot of that is based, you know, our ability to keep love or maintain a relationship can be based in sort of our childhood experience.
Yeah, I don't think it's Freud.
They do say so. They're getting affirmative. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was your name, sorry?
Not all of it. Emma.
Emma, thank you, Emma.
So wait, so just by that logic, out of interest, does that mean that all of the men in the dating pool in the 30s are all insecure attachment? Just asking for a friend.
Statistically, there are things to suggest that that's true. Because secure
I would say
attachment
anecdotally, I've got quite a lot of evidence to suggest that.
Yeah.
There's a couple of hands over there, but I need to go to this lady first. So.
I was just going to make 2 points. So I firmly believe that if you have a supportive social network outside of your relationship is more likely to be lasting, successful. Because I don't believe you can get everything from one person. And I think that there are many things that we hope to get from a relationship that we will never get from that relationship. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's doomed, as long as we can get it elsewhere. So that was one point I was going to make. The other one is that I actually believe that there's an awful lot of luck involved in relationships, and maybe that kind of goes against trying to come up with a solution to how to make love last, because maybe you can't. Maybe there's a luck element involved. But I think you change so much as a person during your relationship, and you actually don't know who you're going to turn into. So the luck part of it comes down to whether you will be compatible in your new form. I met my husband. I feel like marriage changed who each of us were in a good way, and we were compatible, and now we've had a baby, and I feel that has changed us both again, and I think so far we're compatible, but I wouldn't stake my life on it.
It's luck whether you change together in the same ways at the same time. So I'm going to come to you guys in just a second, but actually I can't remember whether it was you, Simon, or you that I spoke to about that. I think both of you might have said, don't feel like you can get everything from one person, and that is one of the secrets. Was it you?
Yeah, I think we both did.
It's so obvious.
Yes, it's so obvious. Don't rely on one person for everything.
But I mean, equally, it's not just a personal decision. I mean, society has pushed us that way.
Yeah.
We don't go to churches anymore, synagogues or mosques or whatever it is. We don't have professional guilds. We're changing our jobs all the time, so our colleagues are changing. We just don't have the kind of social support network that you were talking about in the way that existed 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
So we shouldn't feel like we should get it from one person, but we expect to.
Load more onto one person, and then there's the concept of the one, you know. So we actually both have an expectation because of our ideal, and also social development pushes us that way. So it's very hard to avoid that.
The chips are stacked
friends,
against us.
Friends are crucial.
I'm going to come to you in a second. Could you just remind me of your name?
Josie.
Josie. And just give me 1 second. There were 2 hands over here. Yes. Yes. Hi.
It's just on the idea of dating that's been mentioned a few minutes ago. And whenever I hear this word, I'm personally not English. And I've talked to a lot of my friends, and sometimes I would see people casually, and then someone would say, oh, you're dating. And I wasn't sure what exactly that meant. What does it mean to date somebody? Does it mean that you're in a relationship? Does it mean your boyfriend or girlfriend? And that used to scare me and almost confuse me because I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to be in a relationship at that point. And you know, this conversation on whether you're able to date numerous people at a time, I think that depends on what you define as dating. Are you able to be in a relationship with more than one person at a time? Personally, I don't think I can, because a relationship is much more committed than just casually dating for me. So, you know, I think you're able to see numerous people at a time, but I don't think that if you want to take that one step further, which is a relationship, then I think that's a little bit more difficult because, as some people mentioned here, you're putting a lot more time into that. So I think that a lot is defined by the words that you use and what they mean to each person. And dating is, to some, a very big word, so you cannot date numerous people at a time, and to others it's something a lot more casual, like just seeing someone.
Okay. Thank you. And the lady behind you.
Sarah. I actually, to backtrack onto that, I think in today's society, with obviously consumer dating and all of that, relationships are changing so much that some people are choosing to be self-partners, some people are choosing to be monogamous, and because there's a lot of grey areas within what dating, for instance, means to certain people, you might come across people that are in open relationships and are just looking for a partner just on the side versus people who are looking for monogamous relationships. And it's the idea of finding someone that is more compatible to you is so hard because it's not so black and white anymore, where it was just that marriage is the end goal and creating a family is the end goal for both parties. Now there's so many other factors involved, and I think that's what makes people feel that like at the end of the day, I think now there's no right or wrong. It's like what works for you, and finding someone that relates and is on the same level as you is what I think people need to find. I don't think there's a right or wrong at all, and I think it's just about transparency with that person, and as soon as you meet someone that you think you're compatible with, it's about being open and opening those floodgates of communication, being very transparent. I also think dating is changing as well, where maybe the consumerism side of things is a bit more for the younger generation, but I mean, I'm 30 now and I've been in 2 really long-term relationships where I've been the one that's ended both of them because I felt like, you know, you get to a point and you're just like, this isn't working for me anymore, I'm ready to just sort of move on, as harsh as that sounds. But I think you also get to a point, as a personally speaking as a female, that you have a ticking clock and everyone knows about that. So you might end up getting to a point in your late 30s, and this hasn't even been mentioned yet, but like you might actually want a family, and then at that point you might end up saying, okay, I'm just going to take, you know, whatever's working at this point and stop being fussy and just like find someone to have a child with and try to raise like what society deems as the most normal like family kind of relationship to build upon, because at the end of the day, like, you can date all you want and it can be as like, you know, hit and miss as possible, but that's
so there's a sort of natural biological end to the kind of consumerist shopping period.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it has to come to an end. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily, but obviously with the pay gender gap and all of that, like, it is really hard to just, you know, get, you know, a donor and all of that if you wanted to do it on your own or whatever, but like, you've got to look at all the factors involved. So.
Kate, you were going to say something then before I go to this lady here.
Yeah, I think like the traditional, we talk about a lot in therapy, this what used to be the escalator model of relationships. So you kind of date, you're together for a while, you might move in together, get engaged, get married, have children, and now we're seeing that people actually don't necessarily need to do things in this step-by-step model. They can create their own patterns about it. But I also think that once you're in a relationship, recognising that every stage of a relationship, you were mentioning having children, things can completely change, and you have to kind of reassess at every point and be like, how do we do this together in a different way? Not the way it was at the start, but now this is us, where we are now, things have changed, finances, fertility, where we live, jobs, whatever it is, you're going to be impacted by your context at every stage of a relationship, and so navigating that as a couple takes a lot of work, and acknowledging that where you are now, not where you were then or where you expected to be, is a really important part of that.
Thanks. Hello. Hi, Joe.
I just wanted to challenge the idea that there's luck involved in whether a relationship lasts or not. Because I'm a relationship therapist as well as you. And I know that working with couples, that understanding the root of what's happening to them in the relationship, the defensive system that Gottman talks about, which we all go into because we all feel vulnerable. I mean, relationships bring so much up in us. And I think the more you know yourself, the more you understand deeply what's triggering you, what's happening between you when you're not getting your needs met, when you're not having the sex you want, when you're not communicating. These require conscious thought, awareness, and an understanding of, you know, the source of difficulties or the source of excitement. Your source, your essence. You need to know yourself. It just doesn't happen like that. I think that to maintain, to keep love, requires real attention and curiosity to the relationship. It's not just sort of random luck whether we can stay together or not. It actually requires a lot of, you know, I always say the grass is greener where you water it. And I think that is it, really. You've got to keep watering the grass where you are.
So I'm quite interested in that idea, and there was a hand just behind you, and I'm going to come to it in a second, but because actually I did start to notice a pattern in some of my friends, and I wonder if other people have noticed this, that that some of my friends started to have counselling or relationship counselling, not because they were in trouble, as I think was previously, but, you know, some of them in the run-up to their wedding, or, you know, just to, or just as a sort of matter of course, as a sort of lifestyle choice. And I wondered if other people had heard of that as a sort of, because it seemed, rather than it being a, oh my God, they're in relationship counselling, more quite a healthy choice, actually. Does anyone else, or is that just my friend?
Well, Renee and I got married, sorry,
no,
but Renee and I got married 3 times because of the way the law kept changing. And we did find that...
Were your friends sick of buying you presents by the 3rd time?
Yeah, well, definitely no presents by marriage 3. But we found that in the run-up to each time we were going to have the ceremony, that was the most stressful time in our relationship, but also probably the most beneficial, because it's the time when you look at the relationship and go, okay, this is what I'm saying I really want, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this again, I'm going to do this again. But it was when we had the most arguments and the most times where we were just like, we can't, because it put our relationship under quite a lot of stress. But I think it was a good thing.
Were they helpful arguments?
I think so, because obviously we came out the other side, and we walked back, and then had the discussion. Then we ended up having what we call the tablecloth argument, which is the sort of default argument that I think a lot of people have in their relationship, where there's one thing that, in our case, it was about a tablecloth, but it was actually about...
who's pro and who's anti-tablecloth?
But it was about who was making decisions, who was saying, you know, this is my thing, and this is what I want, and how the balance of power in relationships, which, as we know, goes up and down. But yeah, so I would say it's a great idea to get counselling around getting married, especially, but also just if you're going to have a long-term relationship.
Can we get married again?
I'll decide the tablecloths, okay? There's somebody who's been waiting here for a while.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Clara.
Clara. Hi, Clara.
I'm going to try really hard to say this in a way that's not a question.
Okay. You can bend it.
So I've noticed that most people in this room are women, as well as most of the people quoted in the notes, and that just makes me think about whether there are any essential differences in the way men and women understand and engage with the idea of love. So I'd actually like to hear a bit more from the men in the room, or whoever has something.
A challenge laid down to the men, not a question. You spoke very briefly. Anyone else? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to come to you first because your hand went up first. So what's your name?
George.
George, hi.
Is there any particular subject you'd like to hear about?
I don't know, is this
Yeah, no, so
a
I've been
subject
kind of
that
thinking about something to say for the session. So I think one of the really interesting things for me, so I'm quite a heavy app user at the moment, and I came to the first session that we had kind of around finding love. And one of the things that I have noticed, both me personally and kind of in the group of people that use these apps, is people's tolerance thresholds due to kind of this autonomy and consumerist mindset for kind of what they're willing to take in terms of flaws that they see or things that they don't necessarily like in a potential partner is kind of rapidly decreasing. I've noticed that myself, that I am not willing to kind of tolerate as much the things that I see that are negatives in my partner or potential partner. And I think this has had kind of a big impact on how I engage with the concept of love, because it's become quite difficult for me to kind of say that I'm willing to accept somebody despite all of their flaws if I don't think that they're going to be a healthy person for me to be with long term. And that kind of decision-making process of what the balance is between what I'm willing to accept because I believe that at the core of the relationship this person is beneficial for me to grow as a person, because I've always seen it as kind of a partnership. You're running your lives in parallel, you shouldn't build your life around a single person. And that kind of threshold keeps dropping every time you kind of go through and you find new things that you don't necessarily like about people. Because when you open up to a big pool of people to potentially date with, where I'm from Swindon originally, moving to London, there was a much smaller pool of people to kind of date at school and college, and everyone was kind of very similar. There was similar interests, people knew about similar things, but dating people from different countries and realising that there are certain personality traits and kind of things that you then all come back into a central kind of hub of things that you like or don't like. And I found that that's quite worrying for me, and I'm seeing trends. One of my close friends has recently got out of a relationship and he started using a lot of the apps as well, and his personality and the way that he kind of talks about women and about dating has changed quite significantly.
So is this talking to Kate's point at the start?
Yeah, Kate, sorry, and the final point I wanted to make was in the first session we had around the concept of love, there was the kind of the psychologist's name, but he raised the point that the kind of difference between infatuation and love.
Stephen Gross.
Yes, yeah.
Stephen Gross, yeah.
The difference between infatuation and love is that form of sacrifice, that form of willingness to accept that this person has flaws that may not necessarily be in your best interests, but ultimately you are making that sacrifice, and that's a decision that you've made autonomously, that you are willing to accept that. And I think that there is a way of coming back round to that realisation, but I don't think at the moment the modern dating landscape is making that the easy decision to come to, because there's a lot of supply to meet people's increasing demand for different things from a relationship.
Okay. Did you say your name was
George?
George, that's what I wrote down. And the gentleman here?
My name is Yevgeny. I want to say that we are one of those couples that we haven't committed to. Sorry, we haven't found a therapist to work with, but we've discussed this idea very early on in our relationship. Basically, when everything, like months, like 3 maybe, when everything is going amazingly well, we discussed fairly openly, like, hey, it's going well right now. It's the beginning, of course, but at some point we'll probably run into some challenges. Let's find a couples therapist to start seeing them maybe once a month, once every couple of months, just on an ongoing basis. And so we haven't started it yet, but that's very much on the to-do list.
Yes, cool.
And actually, just to add to this, if I may, sorry, it's not, right? So, sorry. So, I would probably like to challenge the idea of keeping the love, because I feel like it's not that we keep the love keeps us together. And I think if you don't mind me sharing, actually, what I think we're really good at, because we do have really big arguments. Actually, before coming here, we had a massive argument.
Why are we going to this stupid thing?
It was pretty ironic. You actually told me, why are we going there after? But the thing is that we want to sort out the things. We want, and I think in general, that the other person is right for you and is your soulmate, like that, the one, however you want to call it, even for that time, you want to get over the things and you want to talk things out. And we actually had this thing where I was really horrible, I'm sorry. But we actually we did talk about it, and we kind of want to sort it out. We want to work it out. We want to kind of, even things out, reflect, learn, move on. Because I think, and that's what actually, it's not really that we doing that just protect and cling to each other, but it's just that love that we have just makes us move forward.
I'm going to end with for a little point that I'd like to make, because when I got married in a church, don't know why, but the vicar there made us go through a sort of thing that was a bit like marriage therapy. Before we got married, he insisted we had these sessions with him and talk about what we liked about each other and what we didn't like about each other. One thing that really stayed with me ever since, and so I give this to you as a gift, is that I remember him telling me, and I assume you guys could back this up, that couples who argue and couples that don't argue, there is no difference in the splitting up rate. And in actual fact, I think it's slightly in favour of couples who do argue, because they're actually airing grievances, and the worst thing you can do is suppress a grievance. So arguing's fine, everyone. I take that as a reason to have a massive argument on a weekly basis. So now the flag has gone up. It's over to me to sort of try and sum up some of the interesting things that I would take away from this and think about for Tortoise. I really appreciated sort of Kate's opening remarks about the landscape of relationships and how things have changed, because both partners work. Religion is less dominant in society, and the difference that digital dating has created, not just on how we find love, but how we keep it, because of what George was saying towards the end, that sort of we're less likely to accept flaws, which tied in, Simon, to your thought about that sort of consumerist attitude to relationships that we have, and that even 8 years is good going in the current landscape. But I was also very interested in the idea of how the cult of autonomy is at odds with our desire for privacy, and how that is becoming even more. That's a sort of trajectory which has been going on for ages, but it's just been sort of sped up by digital dating. And we had that really interesting conversation about the soulmates or the one. Your lovely relationship was quite interesting, because it seemed to have that sort of moment of the one, but actually that people seem to echo the idea that the one really comes through working at it and over a period of time. And it would be, is it Paula? It would be ridiculous to think that you don't have to work at a relationship. Is it Agla? I wrote that down. That you might have a soulmate, not necessarily one for life. The partner is a reflection of who you are at a particular moment. And Rose, and we didn't talk as much about friendships as I wanted to, but I was very pleased with your intervention at the start that soulmates are not necessarily romantic. And the fact you say goodnight to your friend every night. Did she just say goodnight?
I also just think, as a lead to the next one that you're doing, to remember that keeping love, if it's not good love, is not a good thing.
No, absolutely. And I think, Karina, it was you who said that the divorce is not necessarily a bad thing when relationships aren't working. We live in a different time where some, not all women, are more financially independent, and there's no reason to stay in relationships that aren't working. Although, Freya, you made the point that too much of marriage is about a wedding, and that creates, as Kate said, that sort of unrealistic expectation that people can have on relationships. Diane, I love the fact that your mum dated John Gottman, but almost didn't because he messed it up, so he's not that good at love after all. And I think that, you know, you touched on, is Emma, that attachment theory, and you know, our ability to keep love as sort of rooted, might be even rooted in our history and past. And you know, something Kate said to me on the phone that we didn't really get into here is that if you are unhappy with yourself, you really can't be happy with another person. And I think that is quite a key part to keeping love. Josie, you echoed something that other people have said to me. You can't get everything from one person, so don't expect to, although, as Simon would say, society tries to insist that we can, but don't expect to. And there was that concept about luck and whether, you know, it's lucky that you changed together. It was Joe who challenged, is it Joe? Who challenged that idea. And I think a really interesting ideas to keep love requires attention and conversation, and I love that expression, which I've never heard before. The grass is greener where you water it, and I think that is one of the key things I will take away from today. So thank you to all our panel, thank you to all you for your contributions. I found that really interesting and helpful, so I hope you did as well. Thank you.